Okay.
Interesting first lap. Interesting silly season. It's been a while.
Mm-hmm. Lots of interesting things.
Okay, are you ready to go?
I am ready to go.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, the American take on Formula One. We just finished watching quite the race in Belgium. Max put on quite the show, as did Ferrari, only with different results. We have a content-rich episode for you. We will break down the Belgian Grand Prix and the silly season. Son, can I get your take on what we just saw?
Yeah, lots of fun things to talk about today. My 3-word take for this race is championship's already been decided. It's not 3 words, but it has to be said.
Funny. Mine would probably be what Alonso said. We'll get into that later, but Lewis, the veterans, Lewis and Alonso had a bit of a coming together in the first lap, and it took Hamilton out of the race and likely out of contention. Realistically, there was always still a chance, and Mercedes has always had decent pace and superior reliability. Lewis being Lewis, with 9 races left, he was within striking distance, but I think after today, that is no more. But let's first talk about Max, because this was his race. I saw an interesting statistic that said, I think only the great Bruce McLaren has ever won 2 races in a row from P10 or further back. Max has just done that, P14. It was just amazing pace. I'm sure the conspiracy theorists can say they told Sergio to sandbag it, but I don't think that was the case. Max's car was great, and he is just in the zone right now. Everyone is fighting for second place, and that may continue for a while.
Yeah, nobody was anywhere close, not even his own teammate, Perez. Like you said, I don't believe he was sandbagging it. I mean, we saw in qualifying on Saturday, Verstappen was just so far ahead of his teammate, even in qualifying. And then to get past, I don't know, it was something like 8 or 9 people in the first lap, and then to be behind a safety car backing up the rest was the perfect opportunity for Verstappen to make a quick jump to that top spot. And he did so before even the halfway point in the race, and just, crushed everybody afterwards. So,
I given his qualifying, I thought he was going to get up there very quickly. I thought a podium was possible, but not likely. I mean, Carlos and Charles, their cars were doing well. He had to fight through Lewis, theoretically, and George, and his teammate Sergio. So I did not think he was going to win. I thought there was a chance he would podium. You and I were here in the U.S. It's several hours behind Belgium. It's Sunday morning. I step up to get myself another cup of coffee. I come back and he's in first. I'm like, what the hell? I was gone 90 seconds. How did that even happen? I mean, this was just, he was in the zone today. If I'm Ferrari, and even if I'm if I'm Mercedes, I almost write this one off. It's like, look, sometimes it's the right driver, the right car, the right track. No one was going to catch Max today. That said, Ferrari, Carlos, he got on the podium. Charles had a chance to get on the podium. There were minor errors, in qualifying. I think Ferrari put a new set of tires on Charles's car, which they shouldn't have. They took the chance in the race to go for fastest lap and pitted him late. There was a mistake. I think he was over the speed limit. But I would sort of write this one off if I'm Ferrari, because I think they're closer than this race revealed. What do you think of that?
I think that's a good question, because I think they can't just write it off. I think they need to learn something from this race, from their performance. The drivers do, the pit does, strategists obviously do, and then the communication on the pit wall still is clearly lacking. I mean, they screwed up in multiple instances this weekend, and they still kind of look like a team that doesn't really know what they're doing, which is weird because they've been in Formula One for over 50 years. I mean, yeah, it's just kind of ridiculous what's going on with that team. They have a car that should be able to compete with Red Bull, at least on most tracks. And in the last few races, they haven't really shown the ability to race Red Bull. And that, I think, is concerning. I think they need to figure out better race setups. Red Bull has shown that they don't need to start from pole in order to win. I think Ferrari need to kind of adopt that mentality and realize that you can't just set up your car for Saturday qualifying, because that doesn't actually get you anything. You need to be ready in the race. So I think overall, don't beat yourself up, I guess, with this race, like you were saying, but take something from it, learn from it, move forward, and be better next week in Netherlands.
Yeah, the Ferrari car, when you look over the course of the full season so far, I think it definitely can compete with Red Bull. Ferrari, a couple of years during the Mercedes dominant era, were close, but they never could get close plus reliability. They are right now with Red Bull. A lot of the car, I think, seems over the course of a season equal to Red Bull's. But it's I think the pressure getting to Charles, more so even than Carlos, the pressure getting to Binotto, the team principal, with the strategists, because they keep making mistakes. These are self-inflicted wounds. Max today and Red Bull today were dominant, but over the course of the season, that's not the case. Red Bull could be much closer. Red Bull could even be in first. Charles could even be in first. I'm sorry, Ferrari could even be in first. Charles could even be in first. There's just self-inflicted wounds. I think we've been sort of letting Charles off the hook, blaming Ferrari strategists, for example. But there's too many of these incidents, like him going over the speed limit in the pit lane today, where it's like, look, you're in here to win this. And I think there's some sort of self-sabotage going on in Ferrari. And right now it seems, even though he's a few points behind Charles, Carlos is the one that's sort of the most level-headed of anyone in that team.
Yeah, I think Leclerc is generally first to blame himself when he does something obviously wrong. But I think the team as a whole has really let down both of their drivers on multiple occasions. And even, sure, speeding in the pit lane is kind of a weird one because they even have a pit limiter, so it shouldn't be an issue at all.
Right.
But to even make that call to bring him in when he's sort of in the clutches of Alonso is an unbelievably terrible decision to make on the final lap of the race. It's idiotic. And I can't understand why anyone in their right mind would believe that that is the correct decision to make when so much could go wrong for essentially zero gain. 1 point is not going to get you back the 100 points that are gapped between Leclerc and Verstappen currently, right? It really doesn't bring you back a whole lot. I think you take the points that you have and finish there and move on, like you were saying. They chose to do something stupid and it backfired again. And I think they just keep doing that. They basically screwed up their qualifying session, and luckily, Carlos Sainz's first Q3 lap basically got him pole, but they totally screwed it up for Leclerc, who could have potentially started ahead of Verstappen. So I just think, the drivers and the rest of the team still are not on the same page. They're constantly asking questions of each other during the race, which you don't see any other team do. I think they're very much at odds, and I would have expected that over the break, they would have sort of ironed out some of those issues, but it seems like they haven't. And for that reason, I don't think they get anywhere near Red Bull or Verstappen by the end of the season.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, which is unfortunate because they have a great car, two solid drivers. Speaking of the sort of the changes made over the summer break, I know that teams weren't supposed to be working, not really, on car improvements, but this was the race where they instituted the technical directive. There were flooring issues. There was a lot of suspicions that Ferrari and Red Bull had pace over Mercedes because they were sort of found a potential loophole in the rules with flooring, and it would also effectively end the worst of the porpoising concerns. But we come back and Red Bull is just far ahead of everyone. Ferrari still isn't getting, figuring their situation out, like you just said. And Mercedes, in both qualifying and the race, just were nowhere near Red Bull. Now, I want to give Red Bull credit because I think there's no team in this, even in Mercedes' dominant era, they had that dominant car. They had Lewis Hamilton. But Red Bull is just focused 100% on F1 success. But Ferrari is starting to spread the rumor that Red Bull is making upgrades to their car that almost certainly exceed the spending cap. Now, this year they've instituted a hard spending cap on the cars. But And all teams have to abide by it. So a few years ago, Mercedes, for those new to F1, Mercedes was spending hundreds of millions on their car. Ferrari, not the same, but a lot. Red Bull right there as well, and every other team was just far behind. Now all the teams have a hard spending cap, and yet we're seeing Red Bull sort of pull ahead and seem to keep bringing upgrades to their car that make it even better. So that was I took the long route, but do you think there's any possible truth? Because we don't see, I'm not sure there's any transparency in the spending. I don't know how FIA is monitoring that. Here in the US, for example, the NFL has had a hard salary cap for well over a decade, and it is very closely monitored. But we don't know that with F1. What do you think? Any truth to those rumors? You think that Red Bull is just sort of well over its budget? It's sort of violating the rules.
I think because we're not super aware of how it's monitored, I would say I think it's not particularly far-fetched to believe that they would be over the spending cap. mostly because I think Christian Horner is very wily, and he will do whatever it takes to win. And I think if he can figure out how to hide a few extra dollars here and there, he won't hesitate to do that. At least from an outside perspective, that kind of seems like something he might try to do. So, just for the sake of it would be fun if a team got caught like infringing on those particular rules. I don't know. I'd say, yeah, sure. There could be some truth to that.
Right. We don't really know how much the teams have spent so far. We don't know how it's documented. So it's a good conspiracy theory. Ferrari's already started spreading this, and I almost want it to be true just for the visceral thrill of wondering what FIA would do. What would they do to Red Bull? What would they do to Christian Horner, to Max, for example? But I think we should also state that that's not the same as all the teams lobbying to have the spending cap increased. I studied the spending cap issue quite a lot, and inflation, particularly with logistics and traveling, has just skyrocketed over the past year. So when Red Bull or Ferrari, for example, says they should increase the spending cap, that's a legitimate concern.
I think we should also note that even though there is a spending cap, not all of the teams spend up to the spending cap. Not all of them can. So it's still a lot of money that not all the teams have. And that's why we can still see such a distant gap between the top teams and some of the bottom teams.
Right. And I mean, Red Bull has been picking off some top Mercedes staffers over the past year. I'm guessing they're offering them a good deal more money. So, that money's coming from somewhere. So I think it's a good topic to discuss. I mean, we love F1, we love racing. But here in America, like I said, we're so used to, for example, the NFL spending cap that becomes a big concern and a big topic of discussion. How about your top 5 for this race, Patrick? Who do you got?
Sure. So this was a pretty interesting race, at least to begin with, and then kind of ironed out itself throughout. But I think, the top driver of the day was pretty obvious. Max Verstappen. He started way back on the grid due to some grid penalties for new power units, and quickly and frankly fairly easily made his way up to the front, passing his teammate, also passing the likes of Carlos Sainz and George Russell, and just continuing to fly up the road, getting fastest lap. And actually, he was fastest in qualifying too, right? So
yes.
Unfortunately, didn't start on pole because of those penalties. But yeah, overall, his weekend was far and away the best of any driver.
Nice.
Go ahead.
I also have Max. I mean, this was his race. Nobody was in this race close to Max. So I also have him as number 1. So I think the interesting is 2 through 5. Who do you have?
Yeah, so 2, I think, might be a little bit interesting. This is another guy who outshone his teammate by a long shot this weekend. I have Alex Albon in a Williams picking up another point. He has all 4 for that team so far this season. The same, I might add, as one Lance Stroll. So doing really well in the Williams, having a really nice drive after the summer break, and just really was doing so much better than his teammate, Nicholas Latifi. Then in third, for me, I have Fernando Alonso. Great weekend for him in that Alpine. Had a coming together with Hamilton, but ultimately I think Alonso was not at fault in that situation. And then still ended up getting a top 5 finish thanks to some odd Ferrari decisions and a Leclerc error in the pits. But I mean, P5 in that Alpine is really well done to Fernando Alonso. And then I have in fourth, Seb Vettel, once again, significantly better than his teammate Lance Stroll. I thought he had some good scraps with a number of different drivers this weekend, and I think he's been really solid, especially since announcing that he's going to retire at the end of this season. And I think he's picked up the vast majority of points for that Aston team. And I think his influence on that team can't be overstated, at least at this point in the season. And then in my final spot, I have Charles Leclerc. I think, he knew he was going to get grid penalties, still made it into Q3, worked pretty hard for his teammate, and then still should have had a top 5 finish, even with a number of sort of issues that happened, including early on, he got something stuck in his brake duct, which made him come in for an early pit stop, sent him all the way to the back of the pack during the safety car, and still picked up a solid finish. So I have Leclerc as my 5th driver of the day.
Nice. So Max, Alex, Fernando, Seb, and Charles. Excellent. I have Max at number 1. My number 2 is Alonso. He and his team at Ocon are doing a great job there with Alpine. They are at distant 4th place, but 4th place nonetheless. And I think that is a bit of a surprise. And I thought he had a great qualifying and race today. The coming together with Hamilton almost took him out, but he kept his head about him and had a good, solid race. My number 3 is George. Russell, I mean, he's what can I say? He's got more points than Lewis, his first year with Mercedes. That can't be overstated, I think. You can write that off the first few races, but you look at the number of qualifying wins versus Lewis, you look at his points total. I think, Mercedes have got themselves a great young driver. And for him to, take that Mercedes, keep his head down, stay that close in the points. I think it's remarkable, and I think he had another solid race. My number 4 is Alex Albon. You had him as your number 2. Great qualifying, great race. He's getting as much out of that Williams, I think, as just about anyone could. He's clearly outshone Nicholas Latifi. So great job for Alex. Always happy for him. My number 5, here's where we differ. I have Pierre Gasly. AlphaTauri, we don't know what sort of happened to them. They seem to have fallen off the map, become irrelevant. The last several races, they've done nothing. But he put in a solid weekend and a solid race, and I believe got them back into points, finally. So I have Max, Fernando, George Russell, Alex Albon, and Pierre Gasly. Now, I want to get to the incident. Lewis Hamilton, one of, I think, his best traits, I mean this is high praise, is the man knows how to get the elbows out. He knows how to ding his rivals, to send them off into the gravel, and do it in such a way that he's guilt-free. The stewards let it go. Racing incident every time. The stewards did not give him a penalty this time, but he was 100% at fault. And it was obvious from the moment it happened. Like, we didn't need to study it. You could see what he was doing. And that was a bit uncharacteristic. So I wondered, was it personal? Because there's obviously a lot of there's a lot of issues between him and Alonso. Hamilton is obviously very frustrated this year. The Mercedes car has not kept up with Red Bull and Ferrari. They come back after the summer break. It seems to be even worse. There was no way he was going to make that without an incident unless Alonso just sort of ceded, and Alonso would never do that. So what do you think? You think that was personal, a bit personal, just another racing incident, or what?
I don't think necessarily that it was personal, at least not towards Alonso. I think, like you said, Hamilton has been pretty frustrated this season and knew he needed to get a good start, and was behind Alonso in that Alpine and was trying to make up places as fast as he could, and just made a very uncharacteristic move, because, as you said, he's good at getting the elbows out and sort of running people wide and forcing them sort of to back off. In this situation, Alonso had the corner the entire time, and Hamilton just ran into him, which, I don't know, it just seemed like he wasn't even paying attention. In my opinion, I don't think it was a racing incident. I think had Hamilton still been in the race, maybe the stewards would have given him a penalty, but they didn't feel like it was enough to warrant a grid penalty in the upcoming race. So they basically did nothing. But yeah, it was a weird situation, because that seems very unlike Hamilton to just sort of slam into somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, he did fess up to it afterwards, and said it was 100% his fault. But that he didn't see Alonso there is kind of weird, because he was next to him the entire time.
Right. He said he was in his blind spot. I was like, no, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. We all know, it was good that Lewis fessed up, but it was like, no, he was not in your blind spot. That had nothing to do with it. Now, of equal import is what Alonso said. And I don't have the exact quote, and it was a bit of a dickish thing to say, but in the heat of the moment, you're out driving. I mean, drivers just on American roads will say stuff that they know they shouldn't have. Alonso essentially said, Lewis can only race when he's starting from the front, which is one of those great digs, like, it's not writing, it's typing, where it's both utterly false, but it's just so it shifts your thinking, and it's going to stick with Alonso and Lewis for a while, that statement. So what do you think of that?
Well, I thought it was hilarious, and I enjoyed the fact that Alonso said it. I mean, Alonso is an angry Spanish man. And I think when he gets frustrated, he just says things and probably doesn't mean them in their entirety. I think he's well aware that Hamilton is one of the best drivers of all time and can win from anywhere on the grid. But when somebody just slams into you when you're going over 100 miles an hour, I mean, you're going to be pretty frustrated and just say something offhanded. And I think what he said was both funny and, I mean, it's not, given the last 7 or 8 years, it seems not wholly inaccurate to say that Hamilton just sort of isn't accustomed to racing in the middle of the pack. He's very much always out in front and does very well there. But when he gets in the middle of everything, he kind of isn't as adept, it seems like. And I think, just something funny that Alonso mentioned.
Right. I mean, I think Lewis is one of the great drivers of all time, but that Ferrari was so dominant that for, 7-8 years, the worst that Lewis would be at second, so, so it's been fun to see him sort of have to work through, work through the pack. Keeping the focus on Mercedes, I had George as my number 3 driver this week. Is George in 2022, George Russell, better than Lewis Hamilton in 2022?
Interesting. I still don't think so. I think Hamilton's probably still a better driver overall. I think George has a pretty good handle on that Mercedes, and but he seems to me currently like Bottas plus. So he works really well, but he's not scrappy enough. He's not he just doesn't seem like he has the same sort of intensity that Lewis does, and I think that is what separates them currently. And I think Lewis, I would still give him the edge one-on-one with George Russell.
Interesting. Now, speaking of intensity, I was watching the race today. Red Bull seemed to be just so far out in front. Max Verstappen so far out in front. And, this is the new cars, the new regulations, a spending cap. Mercedes had that dominant car for all those years, plus overwhelming spending. I don't mean to try to take anything away from the drivers, the engineers, or anyone else, but they simply had the dominant car plus dominant spending. And it made me realize just how damn hard Red Bull must have been working the past several years just to stay close. I'd love to sort of read a book and, or more likely, watch a documentary on all the work Red Bull were doing over the past several years, just to stay within striking distance of Mercedes. So I wanted to give, hats off to Christian Horner and Helmut, because, they were going against, the dominant team, and they were losing. They lost every year, but it's pretty remarkable how close they stayed. But speaking of close, I don't think the Constructors or the Drivers' Championship is that close. We still have 8 races to go. I mean, do you think, is the Driver Championship effectively decided? Is the Constructors effectively decided with still 8 races to go?
Yeah, well, I answered this question before you even asked it. Yes, it has been decided. Ferrari had to show up today and prove that they were still in it. Leclerc had to show up this weekend and really prove that he could take it to Max. And Ferrari and Charles did not do that. And in fact, the opposite happened, and Red Bull really pounded them into the ground, and I think sealed that that message, and just sort of told everybody that they've locked up the championship, and Max has already won his second drivers' championship. I don't think there's any way that any team comes back from this unless somehow the FIA investigates Red Bull, finds out that they have been spending too much, and does something crazy. So
right.
I'm here for that drama, but I don't think it'll happen.
I'm with you there. Now, what about Sergio Perez? So, for example, I mean, there are a lot of Max Verstappen haters out there, and I'm not sure why. He's clearly, if you don't think he's the best driver on the grid right now, you're wrong, but you have to assume at least he's, let's say, top 2, top 3. He's been a great driver for years. He's been in F1 for 6 years, and he's only 24, and he seems like a genuinely nice fellow. And there are a lot of Max Verstappen haters out there, however, and they seem to never want to give him his due. So even when he wins, you know, he came from P14 today. It's, well, you know, they held back Sergio. No, they did not. But is Sergio holding back Red Bull? I looked at the numbers. Max has 284. Sergio, 191. So he's, you know, he's almost 100 points behind his teammate with still 8 races to go. Do you think maybe Red Bull bringing Alex Albon back would be a smart move?
That's interesting. I think the better option would be for them than to bring Albon back would be to bring Riccardo back.
Wow.
I think they need somebody to just back up Max. And I think at this point in Albon's career, he doesn't want to be the Max backup. I think Riccardo could maybe get in that mindset. And maybe, but I don't know if he would drive any better than Perez would, right? So I think they have an interesting dilemma, but I think, you know, they're so much better than everybody else. I mean, Perez is number 2 in the Drivers' Championship right now. So I don't think it's critical for them to make that decision. I think they probably could get somebody to score more points than Perez, but I don't think he's necessarily holding them back. I think he's doing pretty much what Bottas did for Hamilton and Mercedes for all those years, and I think it serves a purpose. And I think Red Bull are happy with what he's doing currently.
Okay, let's switch to the virtual podium. So today, Belgian Grand Prix 2022, it was Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, and Carlos Sainz. But who do you think belongs on the virtual podium, Patrick?
Well, I saw this guy on like a hoverboard who was flying over the track, which I thought was kind of ridiculous and also pretty cool. So he would just like randomly fly over the track as a car was underneath him, which, you know, hats off to that guy. You're flying around on a literal hoverboard over Spa. That's pretty cool.
Nice.
And then my other one is just kind of silly. Martin Brundle, one of the commentators for Sky, he went on a rant about shiny tape on matte painted F1 cars. And he hates the way that it looks. Like, why can't they just get matte tape to go on the matte cars? And I thought it was hilarious because I love when people hate on random things for no reason. They just have an irrational dislike of something and rant about it. That's my favorite thing to listen to. Podcast idea, nobody steal it. Just people ranting about something. And I thought that was great from Martin Brundle that he just went on a rant about shiny tape.
That's funny. And it's interesting because Martin Brundle is on my virtual podium. It was a fun grid walk this morning, and everybody seemed to be in a good mood, happy to be back racing again. He talked with several drivers. He talked with Ocon, Alonso, and there was some really good banter between him and Christian Horner. I think Martin Brundle, Christian Horner road show would be awesome. They both love F1. They both love cars racing. So it was a real fun grid walk today. So Martin Brundle is on my virtual podium.
Nice.
Okay, let's switch to the soft compound, Patrick. There were a lot of rumors proven true, and this may have been the best summer break silly season in F1 history. Let's start with Alpine. Alonso blindsides them. He's leaving for Aston. Alpine says, we're going to one-up you, old man. We're bringing in the young Oscar Piastri. Oscar blindsides them. Says, no, you're not. He's becoming the only young man in the history of Earth to turn down a guaranteed seat in F1. Then McLaren says, Daniel, we hate to do this, but here's $10 million. Go race for somebody else. So what is your take on this previous silly season?
Well, I was enjoying it. It was very silly. It made me laugh. There were memes about all of this and just how ridiculous and crazy it is to sort of set the grid for the following season. Seb retires and everybody thinks, who's going to replace him? Is it going to be Mick Schumacher? Is it going to be somebody else? And then randomly, out of nowhere, Alonso says, oh yeah, I'll take that old man's seat, trade one old man for another, which is sort of out of the blue and crazy. And I thought it was funny because everybody made memes about Alonso and his horrendous career moves.
Right.
Because he's sort of notorious for making bad career moves. But yeah, I mean, then the whole Piastri fiasco was incredible the way that it unfolded. I mean, can you imagine being like a 20-year-old and having a contract handed to you to race in Formula One and saying, nah, I don't think I want to do that.
I feel bad for him because Zach Brown, the team principal for McLaren, he's signed Lando to a big deal. He signed Daniel Riccardo to a big deal, then fired him. He signed several American drivers to big deals, all with from what we're hearing, rumors or promises of being the next F1 driver when the seat opens up. Well, the seat is opened up. If Oscar does not get that seat, he might get, blacklisted out of F1. He has terrible management. I hope he does get the seat because I think him and Lando would be fierce rivals on the same team, yet both excellent drivers. So that would be fun to see. But if he's not in that McLaren next year, then wow, that was a bad career move on his part.
Yeah, I think everybody just sort of accepted the fact that he would be the next Alpine driver once Alonso left. And for whatever reason, he decided not to do that, even when guys really good young Indy drivers who are already signed to McLaren contracts, like Colton Herta or Pato O'Ward, are sort of clawing for this seat at McLaren as well. I think it's sort of crazy to me to turn down one seat and sort of fight for another one on a team that has been no better than the 1 year sort of being gifted a seat to.
Right. And my assumption is that his management isn't horrible, that he isn't stupid, and that essentially Alpine had said, look, Fernando's coming back for one more year. You're going to have to set out one more year. And then he balked. And so he let his contract lapse, signed a deal with McLaren, and then Alonso said he was leaving. So we'll see. Speaking of people who have a seat but maybe shouldn't have, Nicholas Latifi. There was an interview with the principal Williams, and he said, no, Nicholas is doing just fine. We're planning on bringing him back in 2023. And my reaction was, I think, the same as everyone's. If you bring Latifi back in 2023, you're not a serious team. And it's time for Williams to become a serious team, or let's let the Andretti folks buy them out. We know Audi's moving into F1. Let Porsche buy them out. You can't keep a guy in, there was for money reasons, Latifi brought money into the team. He was a fair driver in F2, but I don't know. It's frustrating to hear that Williams saying they're going to bring him back. And I assume they're just being nice and they won't bring him back. But if they do, I think they're no longer a serious team.
I think it would be better for Williams to race with one driver and one car than to bring Latifi back.
Now,
they would get the same amount of points, right? So it's not like it matters, and they would spend less money.
Right. You could put all that money into it. Yeah. Only one Williams. That's funny. That is funny. But there's still an open seat in Alpine. And we got the fun rumor that it could be an all-French team. Pierre Gasly moving from AlphaTauri to Alpine. I don't think Pierre and Esteban particularly like each other, but which I like because I like teams where there's acrimony. And but it would be interesting to have two French drivers and the all-French team. What do you think of that?
I think that would be great. I would like to see that. I think it would be a fun and interesting team. I think they'd have some exciting battles together, and I think ultimately that Alpine could continue to compete with the likes of McLaren with those two drivers. I think they're two really solid young drivers. Gasly has kind of faltered a bit in the AlphaTauri this year, but that AlphaTauri has been pretty poor overall. So, to get him back in a solid car, I think that would be a lot of fun to see.
Okay, across the line, that is our segment where we predict the top 5 for the next race. We earn points for this. 3 points if you select the right driver in the right spot. 1 point if your driver does finish in the top 5. Patrick, what are the current standings up through Belgium?
Through Belgium, you are sitting on 56 points to my 48. Wow. So just an 8-point gap can be made up in no time. And I think you have the first pick this week.
Okay. Well, the next race is Netherlands, and I believe Max won that last year. Max was in the zone this week, so I'm going to go with Max.
Not a bad pick. Interesting. Yeah, I think I'll for the last time, I'm going to give Ferrari a chance to get me some points. I will go Sainz P1, Leclerc P2.
Ooh, nice. And I don't know what point difference there is between them. I believe Charles is about 5 or so points ahead of Carlos, so that might.
I think it's 15.
Is it 15? Okay, 15. So that would, yeah, that's a good one. Let's see. You have then we'll have something like here for my number 2. I will go with George at number 2, Sergio number 3.
Nice. Then my 3-4, I think. Let's see. Who do I want on the podium? I think we'll do Ocon on the podium. And then Hamilton P4.
Okay. My 4 and 5, I will go with Pierre and then Alonso.
Oh, nice. Interesting. Then I think we've got both Ferraris, both Red Bulls, both Mercedes, and both Alpines. I gotta then take the team that really needs some solid points, McLaren. I'll go Lando Norris for P5.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking how much we've forgotten McLaren this year. They should be doing better. I'm not sure why they're not. So for Netherlands, I have Max, George, Sergio, then Pierre and Alonso. You have Carlos, Charles, and Esteban, then Lewis and Lando.
Nice.
All right, crazy predictions. Crazy predictions for next race or the rest of the season. I would just like to say that earlier in the season, I made a crazy prediction that Daniel Riccardo and Mick Schumacher would both be out of F1 next year. That is still a possibility. They don't have seats for next year yet. So some of these crazy predictions could come true. Do you have a crazy prediction for us, Patrick?
That's a good question. Do I have a crazy prediction for Netherlands or the rest of the season? I think that for the rest of the season, we will only see Red Bull wins, Sergio or Max.
Wow. That would be an indictment of Ferrari and Mercedes if that came true. That would be quite something. With the new regulations, with the costs, the rules, the spending cap, for Red Bull to be that dominant, that would be a testament to them as a team and an indictment of Ferrari and Mercedes in particular. Here's my crazy prediction. I noticed that on the podium today was Sergio and Carlos, both Spanish as their primary language. And so my crazy prediction is Mexico, we will have all 3 will be primary Spanish speakers. Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, and Fernando Alonso on the podium.
Interesting. That would be kind of fun if it happened, actually.
All right, I want to remind our listeners, send your questions or comments to hardcompoundpod@gmail.com. We may read them on the show. We definitely will read them. And I also wish to thank you for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. And we are Lights Out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Super show, son. That was a fun show.
It was good. Finally, F1 is back. You get 3 races in a row, so that's pretty cool.